Hello, Manish, and everyone with us on the call today. My name is Thomas, and welcome to today's webinar, Compliance in the Middle East. It's very nice to have you all with us here today. Compliance in the Middle East is shifting faster than many organizations anticipate, especially as UAE regulators strengthen expectations around governance, transparency, and whistleblowing protections. In this session, Manish Bucha, managing partner at SMB Consulting and an expert in investigations and whistleblowing programs, will walk us through the realities on the ground. What's changing, why it matters, and what companies can do to stay ahead. Today, we'll together explore how regulations across the UAE are evolving, what it takes to align local requirements with international standards, how companies can build trust through meaningful and secure whistleblowing programs, and some real stories from organizations in the region, including successes and lessons learned. Again, nice to have you with us, Manish. How are you today?
I'm good, Thomas. Thanks for having me, and a very warm afternoon to all the participants on this webinar. Thank you for having me here, Thomas.
Thank you as well. Manish, let's first talk a little bit about yourself and your overall connection to whistleblowing in government. You've spent more than 20 years working across risk management, internal audit, and compliance. What drew you specifically to governance and whistleblowing in the Middle East?
So, Thomas, yes, it's been more than 2 decades that I have been working in the field of risk advisory, specifically internal audit, compliance, whistleblowing, fraud investigation. And what drew me in was the gap between how fast businesses were growing and how slowly governance structures were evolving in this region. And over the years, I kept seeing the same pattern. There is a strong commercial ambition, but limited safe channels for employees to speak up. As you know, whistleblowing sits right at the intersection of risk, culture, and leadership. And in the Middle East, getting that right can genuinely transform how an organization operates. And that's what interested me and drew me specifically to governance and whistleblowing in the Middle East.
The landscape of compliance in the Middle East has also changed dramatically in the recent years. From your perspective, what is the most significant shift that you've experienced?
So, the biggest shift is that compliance is no longer just a box ticking exercise. Regulators are now clearly saying to businesses that show us that your systems actually work. So, it's not enough to have a policy. Companies are expected to demonstrate that governance, accountability, and real protection of whistleblowers are implemented across the organization. So this is a paradigm shift that has happened in this region.
From my discussions with our prospects and customers, I also see that whistleblowing is getting more and more attention, not just from building a policy, but also to creating an overall environment with having the right whistleblowing system in place. So speaking about transparency, how would you describe the current state of the transparency and whistleblower protection in the region today? What do you see that's improving? And on the other hand, what still needs work to be done?
So there is definite progress in the region. Increasingly, the authorities in the Middle East region are developing and implementing frameworks across their jurisdiction. And specifically for the UAE, if you talk about framework like the one that has been issued by DIFC and ADGM are setting strong benchmark. That said, culture still lags behind regulation in some organizations. The law exists now that the law exists, but implementation and building that trust in an organization is what is taking time. Companies that invest in communication and follow through are seeing real benefits. And those that don't still struggle with silence and underreporting of whistleblowing issues or any concern that an employee might have in the organization.
I'm happy that you're mentioning the IFC and ADGM as well. We will also touch on those frameworks shortly. Just to recap what you said, I can personally 100% agree with this. I see that the awareness about whistleblowing protection is very strongly increasing among leadership. On the other hand, employee trust is still something that needs to be worked on.
That's right. That's right.
Let's first talk a little bit about the regulatory challenges and opportunities in the Middle East. The UAE especially has introduced stronger governance regulations, including, as you mentioned, the IFC and ADGM frameworks. How do these regulations contribute to improved corporate accountability from your perspective?
So, Thomas, what this regulation does is that they formalize responsibility. The board and the senior management are now clearly accountable for creating safe reporting environments. And this laws also encourage independence in investigation, which reduces internal bias and increases credibility, especially with the regulators and the investors. So this frameworks are a step in the right direction, and it is helping improve transparency and also laying down clear accountability and responsibility for the board and senior management.
From my perspective, I also have experience from global whistleblowing directives. And in comparison to those, I would say that the ADGM, whistleblowing protection law especially, is built very well. And there's also a high focus on the anonymity, which is, of course, crucial to having such a strong whistleblowing process. Also, as you know, many companies in the region operate internationally. What unique challenges do they face when trying to comply with local laws, while also meeting expectations like GDPR, anti-bribery laws, or just global whistleblowing standards?
So the challenge really is fragmentation. If you look into it, there is no common law across the region. There is no federal law here in the UAE, but different authorities and even the central bank have come up with their whistleblowing protection. So all these different jurisdictions have different rules around anonymity, whether it's data privacy, the timelines, and reporting threshold. Uh, what it does is that executives in organizations which are working in multinational environment, they often worry about over complicating system. But the real risk is underestimating the expectation and ending up non-compliant in multiple jurisdictions.
I'm happy that you're mentioning also the data protection requirements as one crucial part of the local laws. This is also what I'm hearing from our current customers. For example, local data storage is almost a must-have for most of the companies, meaning that the data does not leave the UAE especially. This is something that I'm seeing as a difference from the global scale as well, where you have some regional data hosting, for example. Summing up on this, from your experience, what practical strategies help business managing this balance, honoring local rules without falling short globally?
So I would say that businesses need to start with the highest common standard. So typically, embracing what is there in EU or the global best practices, and then localize wherever necessary based on the specific requirement or guidance of the regulations which has been issued. So having one core framework, one reporting system, and clearly documented variations by jurisdiction. So simplicity and consistency are the key. Once businesses work towards that, they will be able to balance this requirement.
Simplicity is also a crucial thing for the employees itself, right? They need to feel comfortable with reporting issues. The process shall be easy for them, and they should be feeling safe to speak up within the organization, giving the specific centralized channels. Now, do you see regional regulators becoming more aligned with the international norms in the next few years? And what should companies prepare for actually?
I think absolutely. We are already seeing that direction. Regulators are enforcing and typically uh, picking up the global best practices and trying to implement in this region. Companies should prepare for more scrutiny, stronger enforcement, and clearer expectations around investigation, documentation, and outcome of any case that is reported.
Yes, that's very nicely sums up the whole process of taking in the reports, doing the right workflow behind it, the investigation, and then summing up the whole report. Now let's take a closer look at who's actually responsible for the whistleblowing projects within the companies. Let's maybe first start with the leadership roles in shaping the organizational culture. What can senior leaders do to ensure whistleblowing is viewed as a contribution to company integrity and not an act of disloyalty?
So, leadership behavior matters more than policy. The tone at the top sets up as the right kind of a framework that needs to be implemented in the organization. When leaders openly acknowledge reports and protect the reporters and act on findings, whistleblowing becomes a sign of integrity and not a betrayal. Silence from leadership sends the opposite message. So it's the right tone at the top which needs to be set, and it needs to be advertised around in terms of what protections are available for the whistleblowers. Also set policies in terms of once a case is registered, how it needs to be followed up and how the whistleblower needs to be updated and kept in the loop at all times. So it's the protection which will help streamline this particular process, and a strong commitment from the leadership is required for this.
And just adding to this, our most successful customers that we work with usually have leadership speaking on different get togethers of the company about building this open and transparent culture of speaking up, actively promoting the channels where people can actually report issues and misconduct, and actually also giving them a chance and motivating them to do so, actually. So it starts by leadership talking from above and pushing the speak up culture already from the start, not just when implementing the system. Now, beyond leadership, which internal teams typically own or support those whistleblowing processes? How should, for example, the internal audit team, compliance, HR, or legal team collaborate in practice, according to your experience?
So a whistleblowing system needs to be looked into as a shared system. And each of this department that you mentioned have a role to play. So compliance are the one that can set the framework. HR will support in ensuring fairness and protection. Legal helps in managing risk and regulatory exposure. And the internal audit function is also a key in this particular framework, which ensures independence and oversight. So defining clear roles, escalation paths, and regular coordination meeting between the stakeholder will make the system work.
From my current discussions and experiences throughout the last year, I often see internal audit departments taking the lead from the start with the project. Although, of course, as you said, it's mostly a combination and a combined effort of the different departments within compliance and HR, because, of course, people can report about different issues, whether it's something strictly whistleblowing related or a general grievance or rather a culture issue that they're working on. Now, for organizations that lack internal expertise, how can external firms like SMB Consulting support them? What does outsourcing parts of the whistleblowing program look like in the Middle East context?
So external providers can bring in independence and confidentiality, as well as the experience that they have in managing similar kind of framework elsewhere. So outsourcing does not mean giving up control for any organization. It means strengthening the credibility, especially during investigation or when employees don't feel safe reporting internally. So external firms like SLB Consulting can definitely add a lot of value for organizations who are looking for support. It immediately gives them access to experience, and it parallelly ensures independence and confidentiality. So independent firms have the relevant expertise which an organization may be lacking, and that's why it definitely provides a lot of support. And we have seen in this region that the whistleblowing hotline is something that the client wants to manage by themselves, but there are elements when it comes to reporting or in terms of any investigation, they do rely upon external support from firms like SAP Consulting.
One thing that resonated to me from what you just said is the actual overall experience. A lot of companies are just starting building those whistleblowing frameworks. In case they decide to do so internally, they often rely on their present experience, which is just starting. So that's also one thing, bringing in really professional teams who actually have the highest experience with whistleblowing governance and the overall investigations. Now let's get also a little bit more practical. For a company starting from scratch, what are the first three steps to establishing a compliant and trustworthy whistleblowing framework in your experience?
So, if I were to pick on the top three tips that a company can look at while building a whistleblowing framework from scratch, the first and the foremost important thing is to get the leadership buy-in. Without it, nothing will stick. So, until and unless there is a strong leadership buy-in for the program, it's not going to work. Secondly, I would say that companies or organizations should look at implementing a secure anonymous reporting channel like FaceUp. It helps a lot once employees or the whistleblowers are given an assurance that whatever information is shared remains secure and remain anonymous, and there are no repercussions against them. And lastly, I would say define a very clear investigation and response procedures. So these three things, which is the buy-in from top leadership, implementing a secure and anonymous reporting channel, and defining clear investigation and response procedure, will dramatically increase trust within the organization.
You're very right. And one thing that actually resonated with me here from what you said is actually the leadership buy in. This is something we're facing on a day to day basis. We often see a lot of energy from middle management and a lot of effort put into such a project in establishing the right business case and working on such an infrastructure. But at the end of the day, everything stops at the leadership level. So, as you said, the buy-in from the leaderships is really the crucial first step to make sure that the project leads toward success. For me personally, educating employees is always a challenge. What are the most effective ways companies can help people understand their rights and protections and feel confident reporting concerns?
I think the organization need to keep it simple and practical. They can take use of real examples, maybe have some short training, prepare a questionnaire FAQs, and also internally have a lot of manager-led conversations with the teams. Most importantly, what is required is to explain what happens after someone reports. Uncertainty is what stops people from speaking up. So once there is a clarity in terms of how the process is going to run and what happens if there is any incident which is reported, will really help in building that trust with the employees, and you'll see that the whistleblowing process is working effectively within an organization.
And when companies are implementing such whistleblowing process, they often get very much support at the start. So this starts all with some joint sessions on educating the employees on how to actually make such reports confidentially. There are often also webinars, different get-togethers offered by companies to make sure that the employees actually are aware of the channels and they know how to use them effectively. Of course, behaving well during such an investigation and then making the right conclusions is always crucial as well to resolve everything. Now, technology also plays a growing role in compliance. How can companies implement secure reporting tools that satisfy both local regulatory and also global expectations from your perspective?
So, if you look into the modern platforms which are available, they allow anonymity. The communication is completely encrypted, and there is a structured workflow from an initiation of or receiving of a case till its conclusion. And this is something which regulators are increasingly expecting, and also helping build the employee trust. So I would say that technology is providing a lot of consistency, security and audit trails, which are paramount for well-governed whistleblowing system to work.
Now we've now covered the positive first steps that a company needs to make in order to establish such a whistleblowing process. But on the other hand, what are the common mistakes that companies do when rolling out their first whistleblowing program, and how can they avoid those?
I think the biggest mistake that companies do is that treat it as a one-time project. They need to understand that it's not a one-time project, but it needs to continuously evolve within the organization. So once implemented, there is continuous training, awareness that needs to follow up. Other thing that companies do is overcomplicate policies. So they need to set very clear and simple to understand policies for whistleblowing. And I would say, lastly, when a case is reported, to ensure that those are followed through and closed. Uh, because I've seen companies failing to close the loop with the reporters, and that's what leads to lack of trust and probably a system to fail. So the biggest mistake in launching it, and one more thing is that in the organization they come up with the policies, they implement the policies, but they do it very quietly and assume that people will just use it. So that's not the case. So what needs to be done is a lot of awareness that needs to be done with the employees. And as we previously discussed, short training, webinar, having FAQs, and continuously talking about it is what will help the speak up culture in an organization.
Very often, a scenario that I'm seeing with customers that are implementing such a solution is they, implement the solution at the beginning and they just leave it be, meaning that they've ticked the box, they have the channel where people can report issues, and that's it. But this is not the stage where building a speak up culture ends, right? It's about constantly improving the infrastructure, the system, getting feedback from the employees, maybe through different anonymous surveys as a follow up, to actually be engaged with the employees and see how they feel about the reporting process, if they feel secure, if everything is simple, as you mentioned. And it's about constantly evolving and improving also the system so that all employees feel comfortable with it. So thank you for those practical steps now on how to set up such a channel. Now let's talk a little bit more about the success stories, which we've as well promised to our audience. Without naming specific companies, can you share examples of organizations in the Middle East that implemented effective whistleblowing systems? And what changes or benefits did they experience? Like, for example, reduced misconduct, improved culture, or eventually fewer fraud losses, for example?
So, in the Middle East region, lot of things do not come out as a public knowledge. But because we are in the field, we are aware of certain success stories and have known certain organizations which have built in strong systems. If I were to give some example, one very classic example, and it was also in the some public information is also available, is regarding precious metal trade. So there were issues more in terms of financial reporting misconduct, which was highlighted by the accountant, and there were issues with how the inventory of the precious metal were reported and the books were put. So, having a strong system to report actually helped them help the board detect the issue earlier, uh, and brought in and probably saved the organization from major losses and strong public outcry. So there are a lot of examples which are there. Similarly, whether it's in UAE, and there have been certain instances in Qatar or Saudi, whereby strong systems to report helped in earlier detection of issues and restricted the losses, that reputational damage or financial losses that the organization would have gone through.
These are the typical cases that we are experiencing across the whole Middle Eastern region. For example, one situation that comes to my mind as well from one of my previous discussions is that FaceUp, for example, has helped uncover a wrongdoing from the position of the head of HR. So people were not satisfied with their leader within human resources, which has later on moved to the suspension of the current head of HR and rebuilding the trust and culture within the organization. So this is definitely one nice example where such a system has positively improved the culture overall as well, especially touching human resources.
Right. And if I were to just add to it, Thomas, serious issues surface only because there is a whistleblowing channel which is available for the employees. While it may be very painful initially, this kind of cases often lead to stronger controls, leadership changes, and more resilient governance framework within an organization. So it's once you have uh, independent, secure, and anonymous reporting channel, you'll find that issues are getting highlighted. And over a period of time, this kind of reporting reduces not because uh, uh, people stop speaking, it's because issues get resolved earlier.
Definitely. Now, to wrap this up as well, as more Middle Eastern jurisdictions modernize their compliance frameworks, what advice would you give to companies that are just beginning this journey? Where should they focus on first, and how to build long term trust and resilience?
I think the organization need to start with building that trust. So there needs to be a lot of commitment and buy-in by the senior management. Investment is required in leadership commitment, uh, in implementing simpler system, and a consistent follow-through whistleblowing uh, process. So whistleblowing isn't about catching people; it's about protecting the organization and its value over the long term. So my advice is to have a leadership buy-in, build and implement into strong, simple to understand policies and procedure, and take help of technology as much as possible. An organization can always rely upon external advisor like SMB Consulting to help them in their journey, and have a technology platform like FaceUp to serve their purposes.
And of course, as legal regulations in the UAE and the broader Middle Eastern regions are improving over the time, we can also expect that there will be more and more support to all the organizations implementing such whistleblowing processes, not only from the legal perspective, but actually also from the offerings in terms of different solutions available, and as well as building the legal expertise around it.
As we mentioned earlier in the webinar, there is a lot of fragmentation. There are regulations which has been issued by different authorities, but there is a lack of a standardized federal kind of a law. And I do hope that this is something that will be picked up very soon, because we are seeing a lot of improvement on the governance, how an organization is governed. A lot of focus is there, whether it is the Securities and Commodities Authority, which are looking after listed entities. They have come up with a lot of governance rule for listed entities. And similar thing, we expect that probably pretty soon there will be a federal law covering protection for whistleblower, which will help such kind of system to progress very rapidly in a country that has been growing leaps and bounds. And having those kind of regulation will definitely help improve governance within organization. So I do expect that such kind of regulation to come up pretty soon.
Yes, we're keeping our fingers crossed on the federal regulations in order to help improving whistleblowing processes within the UAE as well on the national scale. Manish, thank you for sharing your expertise on the evolving compliance landscape in the Middle East. Your insights in whistleblowing and the role of technology have truly highlighted how companies can navigate the regulatory skills and build trust in the organization. For everyone joining us today, if you're looking to strengthen your compliance framework and implement secure whistleblowing solutions, we invite you to explore FaceUp, You can start with a free trial or book a quick demo to see how our platform can help you stay ahead of those regulatory changes. Thank you again for your time, Manish. It's been a pleasure having you with us today.
It was really nice interacting with you.
Thank you very much.